listeners. Welcome to the Lone Screenplay Nominee Podcast, where we talk about films that were solely nominated for an Oscar in the writing categories. I'm your host, Matthew Anderson, and today we have Luis A. Mendez. Welcome to the show, Luis. How are you doing today?
Well, doing as good as I can be. Just got back from work, but I work from home, which makes it a little bit easier on me.
Nice. If you don't mind me already jumping into that question, to one of my questions I'd like to ask, I usually ask my guest for the show, what is it exactly you do for a living outside of being here on the podcast?
Well, for a living, I basically do some work for. I'm in Florida, but I do some work for a company that's based in California, working on getting some intake and indexing done for workman comps. So I have to
Hmm.
deal with like confidential information and stuff like that. Um, but outside of what I make a living, I'm a film critic and a member of the Critics Association of Central Florida and the Puerto Rico Critics Association.
Yeah, I actually did. Yeah, for a second, I forgot you are also a film critic as well. I forgot about that.
Unfortunately, I
Um,
have not made enough money to make a living off of that alone, but it's
no,
still I still get the goodies like screenings and stuff. So it
you
it's
get
a
to
fun
see
time.
you get to see some great movies, for every maestro you got to watch, you got to see something like Age of Extinction.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I've had.
so
But it's always interesting because a lot of people, they don't know when you go and do these to these screenings. There's some people who are very cynical about it and are really part of this critic community. They think that we go over there and we all just kind of decide together what we're gonna think about a movie. But every screening I've been to, there's always someone there who's gonna break from the majority opinion. Like I
mm,
remember going to see I forgot Renfield, and I seem to be the most negative on the movie, which was weird because
mm,
usually I'm not really the one who's the most negative on it. But without fail, even Dune 2, which a lot of critics loved, like there was one or two people there who didn't like it. So it's always interesting to see afterwards, kind of like how much pushback is the movie getting, and I can tell when a movie's going to get really good reviews because it's probably only one or two people pushing back. But we do
mm.
not get together and decide what we're gonna give a movie. There are plenty of us who have our own opinions and are willing to go against the grain.
Yeah, and I do wonder if you don't mind, real quick, in answering this. Have you ever been in a situation where a said film doesn't get screened for you, and you're like, is it a case of like, oh well, I guess I'm not reviewing that for said channel, or you're like, oh crap, now I gotta pay like $10, $15 down to see this movie myself
Oh, it
now.
happens. I mean, like I remember, like the studio. You could tell when the studio doesn't think a movie's going to be a big critic hit, so they're not necessarily rushing to get it out to critics. Now, if you're in New York or LA, you're going to get a screening of everything. It doesn't matter how much the studio doesn't have faith in that movie. They're going to make sure there's a screening of it. But here in
Yeah.
Central Florida, there have been plenty of times where I've had to pay to go see the movie myself. I don't mind doing that because there is something to it that um, going to see a movie with critics is a little bit different than going to see with an audience. And when you go to see with an audience, you can kind of get a grasp on how audiences react to a movie differently. So there is benefits to that. For instance, I remember I
Yeah.
wasn't able to make my Mario screening, so I had to go pay to see it with an audience. Even though I personally was not a big fan of the movie, I will never forget the experience of watching that audience eat that movie up. So it did not surprise me when the audience scores ended up being so much better than the critical scores. So there is a plus to going out and paying to see it with an actual audience. Though I do use Regal Unlimited because I have a Regal like right next to me. So I
Mm.
do save some money, but Yeah, I don't mind having to go out of my way if I have to. I'm going to watch. There are plenty of movies I watch that I don't do any review of. I don't maybe I don't even maybe I even forget to mention it on social media that I saw that movie because I just watch a lot of stuff every year. So
Yeah, and I try, now that I have Letterbox, I do try to bring up like, oh yeah, I saw like the new Hitman movie by Richard Linklater, which, when I finally saw it, it was kind of a fluke. I was like, oh, I'm up extremely early than I should be, and I have a couple hours to kill, so screw it. I'll throw this on Netflix and see what happens. Yeah, the only reason why I bring that up only because it's like I have a feeling that this summer alone, there's probably the question in regards to like whether or not you see some films you have to pay money for and the studios don't give you a screening for. I have a pretty stinky feeling we're gonna get a couple of
yeah.
those this summer, especially with I don't know if you saw this article already with The Crow, where it's like, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that this might suck, and oops. Especially when a former it was like a former screenwriter for the reboot is like, yeah, this thing is
Yeah.
trash, and I'm like, yeah, it kind of looked like it anyway. So and I don't know, I guess Lionsgate, I think it's Lionsgate who are distributing that. It's just like, yeah, their luck has just not been that great outside of like John Wick and maybe the Hunger Games franchise like has been able to financially support them,
And
but
sometimes it could be also the studio relationship with the people that I'm in touch with to get those screenings. Like focus features is always kind of tough to get screen, and we're talking
yeah,
about a big awards contender, so we got to check out their movies, particularly whatever their top contender is. And I remember,
like the
yeah,
holdovers.
like last year, I remember the holdovers. Like I went and saw that at an early screening before Focus finally let us have a link to see the movie. And then,
Hmm.
interestingly enough, they actually sent us goodies for the Blu-ray release, which was interesting because usually us down here in Central Florida, we don't get the goodies for when a movie comes out, like some critics in bigger cities do. We tend to get the goodies just for like awards time. So, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's sometimes it could be about the studio's relationship with whatever marketing team or critics group that I'm a part of, or sometimes it's just the studio clearly knows that this is a commercial play and they just don't see they don't see a value in getting the critics to see it early.
Yeah, I think with Professor Reed, who was on my previous episode, Bicycle Thieves, we didn't mention on that episode, but I know that he had gotten a handful of stuff from Netflix alone, like especially when Power of the Dog came out, he got this like really cool art book in terms of like all the production,
Yeah.
details that went through it, and they showed all the photos and everything that was captured for the film.
And
It was really,
Netflix goes crazy with the goodies.
oh yeah,
It does. I mean, I got stuff for Naiad. Like it's insane how they make sure that I get my stuff. Like, I mean, I'm happy about it because they sent me some great Maestro stuff. So and I know
nice.
you and me are in Maestro Hive. So
Yeah, we're like one of like maybe two people on film Twitter that we know that were like that really like
yeah,
that movie a lot, or even gave it like a 9 out of 10, at least a
yeah.
nine. And
I mean, it was in
and I
my
know that
top five of last year.
oh yeah, it was my runner up for best for favorite film of that year as well. But yeah, Um, but also, and it was even funnier when like that moment happened. I think it was like the makeup loss, and then you just sent me like a text, which I didn't even realize until like a day or two later. You would send a text of like, Matt, it lost makeup," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's over."
Yeah.
Like the moment it lost makeup, I'm like, "Yeah, this thing was just like makeup or bust." So yeah, so that was my first question, which you already answered in regards to like what exactly did you do for a living. The other question I want to ask is, it's always tough to ask someone what their favorite film is, so I might as well ask what one of you like. What is your favorite genre of film to watch, or one of your favorite genre of films to watch?
Well, I can answer what my favorite film is as well. And my favorite film is basically a battle. It's back and forth between My Man Godfrey and The Shop Around the Corner. Um, in terms of my favorite genre, I've been thinking about this, and I think I think it's probably just romance. Any movie that has romance in it is they're already helping themselves with me. I'm just a sucker for romance films. Um, a lot of my top favorites tend to be screwball comedies that leading to romance. Like one of my all-time favorite Best Picture winners is It Happened One Night. I think that's also a big reason why I tend to really love musicals because a lot of musicals have some kind of romantic plot in them. So I would say that that's my favorite genre. It might surprise some people who know me listening to this that it's not like giant monsters because Godzilla's my all-time favorite movie franchise, but my favorite genre is romance.
Yeah, I think I may have encountered a guest or two who really liked romance. Um, most of them don't like romantic comedies. Don't tend to be my type of thing, but romantic dramas I could deal with so long as there's enough there to keep me invested within the story. Obviously, Titanic is a pretty big one that I enjoy a lot, and there's a bunch of other ones. La La Land, I remembered liking La La Land, although it's been a long time since I've seen that movie all the way through. And yeah, but no, there's a fair amount of romance, and yeah, musicals. There are some that I enjoy, some that I am not the biggest fan of, but yeah, and yeah, so yeah. All right, so without further ado, unless you have any additional questions before we or anything else you want to discuss before we get into our topic, let's get started on our little film that you had picked. So today we heard to discuss Little Caesar from 1931, which was directed by, I'm getting the name, Mervyn Leroy. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And this was made all the way back in 1931. And as always, this won't be a beat by beat bulletin presentation like you hear on other channels, but we will be discussing major spoilers for our talk. If you haven't seen the film yet and want to hear our full thoughts on it, watch the film and then come back to hear us talk about it. So, without further ado, I'll just get through the production notes, which is very little. And as I said for Bicycle Thieves, it's always really hard whenever a guest or whenever we cover a much older film that was like before the 70s or didn't have as much production history behind it, like notorious films have been, where it's like, oh my god, there's like even a whole book on this online or whatever. It tends to be really tough to find a lot of production notes in regards to what went into the making of the film, what was the reason why they made said film. But from what I gather, Little Caesar was made during the pre code Hollywood era, where films were made with progressive ideals and bold subject matter. In fact, many of the topics and themes addressed in this era wouldn't come back in American cinema until the 1960s. And part of that was because the Hays Code, which was set up by Will Hays, came around in 1934, in which it was an attempt to self censor Hollywood studios to appease the moral majority. And because of that, they didn't really have they put restrictions in terms of like what was allowed on film, what wasn't. Even the whole Gone with the Wind, they couldn't say the word damn, or they I guess the studio wanted to ask the ratings board to be like, no, you got to please let us say this one word. And they said, fine, all right, you get to do it. So, and you couldn't show any graphic violence on screen or anything too bloody or too sexually perverse or anything too explicit in terms of nudity in this time period. And yeah, and that was something that Hollywood films did back then. And if anything, it made us, we were able to get a bit more creative with how we were going to write storytelling. We, whenever we had, we never saw two people having sex or having, a couple in, sleeping in the same bed. We always had them in different beds. And it took them like a while for us to like slowly get into like, okay, yeah, sex is, just like in real life, sex is like a thing in our movies and such. or violence is really such a thing in our films. And as far as the production notes on this film, though, Little Caesar, that I could find, Clark Gable was originally considered the part for Joe, who is the best buddy of Caesar. But Warner Brothers' own Jack L. Warner turned him down and ended up getting Douglas Fairbanks for the part. And this film was also a breakthrough for Edward G. Robinson and made him a major film star. And I think the only other film I'd seen him in besides this was Double Indemnity, which is a great movie. I saw that in Stevenson University and it was fantastic. I thought it was really, really solid in terms of what Billy Wilder achieved. And yeah, it was a great film noir, black and white film noir. And despite the success of Little Caesar, though, the author of the novel the film is based upon, W.R. Burnett, he was furious that there were no actual Italians cast for the production. And I think it took us until maybe The Godfather to where it's like, okay, we're actually going to cast we're not only going to bring on Italian filmmakers to make an Italian subject matter like this, but we're also going to hire Italians or some Italians for the film. You know, you got Talia Shire and so on, other actors as well. So yeah, so it was pretty interesting to hear that. You know, the fact that for a while you know, if they ever did a mobster movie, they never got Italians, or they would always get these like Jewish stereotypes, you know, with like the over the top, you know, all right, we gotta go gun this guy down and splatter his brain all over the wall or whatever, you know, all those, you know, stereotypes, you know, whatever the case is, and you know, have them high pitched and over the top. And yeah, it took us a while to finally get there for sure. And as far as the log line for the film, it's pretty simple. It's a rise and fall story of a small time criminal named Caesar who moves into a big city to seek a bigger fortune. And he ends up becoming top dog of the town. And all that comes crumbling down thanks to his best buddy, Joe, who doesn't really want to get involved with this situation anymore and ends up going to the police with his girlfriend to get them all arrested. And this was also made as like I guess like this and Public Enemy were made as cautionary tales, where they were treated more as you weren't rooting for the bad guy, you were more like, we need to stop this kind of nonsense violence going on in our streets, and we need to make sure that this never happens again. Almost like they're treating it like a terrorist warning or like a documentary. And I'm like, you realize some people do this kind of stuff just because of how desperate they are and how, you know, whatever the case, you know, their environment or their situations have become that terrible to begin with. Or maybe it is the case of like, yeah, they just want power and greed sometimes, and it's not all so black and white, so to speak. So yeah, so that's pretty much, you know, all the production notes that I want to give out. Lewis, I am curious to know, because you did a little bit kind of hint at like you know, why you chose the film based on your choices of the types of films you like to watch, you know, with My Man Godfrey and the other film you had just mentioned from 1940. Why was it, out of the list that I gave you, was this on as like a potential for you to want to cover for the show?
Well, I mean, from a personal level, I really really love this movie. It's definitely up there among one of my all time favorite gangster films. If I had like, I would say that there's a quadrology of gangster movies that I really enjoy watching and rewatching, and I would say it's Pulp Fiction, Godfather, Goodfellas, and this one. And also, I when I grew up, um, and I'm always fascinated by the subject of how movies age, and some end up kind of getting a little bit more forgotten with the passage of time. Um, when I grew up, Little Caesar was a pretty well-known movie as a classic. But the older I've gotten and the newer generation coming in, it feels like it's kind of taken a back seat to other movies, which I think has happened to a lot of movies from the early 30s, the talkies as they're known. Um, and I think, and I actually when I was rewatching the movie earlier today, I really looked at the closer at this is that one of the reasons that I think the early 30s movies are kind of struggling to cap these classics to be as big as classics as they were when I was growing up is the pacing of these movies are not what modern audiences are used to. Now, I do have a bit of a cheat code that I grew up on Turner Classic Movies. I grew up on a lot of classic movies, whereas a lot of these old black and white films, some modern day cinephiles are just catching up to them when they get older and start looking for these movies. I grew up on these movies since I was since I was a kid. Um, so I don't mind the pacing of these movies as much as others do. Um, and of course, obviously, we're talking about a movie that's now almost going to be. I mean, what we're talking about almost 90 plus years old.
It's over 90 because it came out in
Yeah,
1931, so it's almost 100.
yeah. So it's I it kind of get. I love to talk about these older movies that a lot of modern day cinephiles maybe they've heard of them, but they haven't had the time to actually go out and seek to watch. I mean, if
Mhm.
people go to my letterbox, they'll see I've seen stuff, a bunch of silent movies, a lot of movies stuff from the 30s and 40s and such. So I think that's what stuck out to me is having a chance to talk about this movie because this movie is important in that it sort of set the template for certain things that a lot of the classic gangster movies would do. And it is the breakthrough for Edward G. Robinson, who ended up being a big actor during the 30s and 40s, particularly playing a lot of villains, but he also did a couple of fatherly roles that are a little bit less known. But um, yeah, I mean, I grew up on these kind of movies, so I kind of gravitated to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like I see where you're coming from because it's kind of like when my brother, who is he's much more attuned to some of the older Godzilla films, or at least being able to go back and rewatch those because he had grown up watching most of them when he was a kid and would always watch them even before I was born. And and I can definitely see that. And I definitely see where you're coming from because this was definitely a starting up point. I mean, especially this and Public Enemy, we're starting the Public Enemy, which was a starting up point for a lot of these gangster films that we got, especially for Martin Scorsese. There's even a shot in here where they're introducing the crew to Caesar for the first time, where it reminded me so much of, like, this is the kind of stuff that Martin Scorsese would pay tribute to in his own film. And even someone like Tarantino is taking inspiration from some of these older classic gangster like films, whether it's just through lip service or through actually, doing so, paying tribute to them through how he's telling his stories. As for me, though, I thought it was okay. It's a film that I think works, like it has its own dated charm to it, and I could see how someone could appreciate this, even respect it in terms of like this being a piece of history, for sure, of how films were being made. And again, this is like an origin of it, so and because of its restrictions and what we didn't know what we could do with the gangster genre at that time, we thought this is pretty much to the extent of what we could do with it. And now we've reached a point in our own culture where we're able to make much more complex and interesting, characters within the gangster genre. Even the style of filmmaking. Look at a lot of these other filmmakers that are taking inspiration not just from Hollywood from the 1930s, but even looking at like the French wave of how films are being edited and how movies are being made with like a non-linear structure to it, adding narration to it, things like that, where they're not relying on these cue cards or these newspaper clippings of passages of time going by. And even to a certain degree, a lot of biopics are using some of the templates of these older films where they're showing passages of time. And you see obviously the guy growing up a bit and being where he is in the world. And it's so like all that, for better or for worse, it's all now there. And we've reached that point where it's like, okay, again, we can make complex characters, make interesting stories. And I definitely understood the intention of what they were trying to do enough to where I respected them enough, but I never really fell in love with it or even fell attuned to it like some would, like clearly you have, Lewis. And that's great. I'm really grateful that you're able to enjoy it and appreciate it for what it is. Even if and it does sound a little bit like you agree with me though, in that like we have evolved into better gangster
Yeah.
films out there, at least ones where we can just go more complex in terms of how we tell the stories and how we make the characters much more interesting than where we were in the 30s. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, though I would argue that there are little moments here where they try to create a little complexity because they seem to hint that he's really scared to go back to that old gutter life. Like when we see him at the beginning and he's poor,
No.
and how scared he is, and how he gets to the point where he gets really cocky about this new rich lifestyle as he's climbing up the criminal world ladder. And then, of course, the whole complexity around this relationship that he has with Joe, and how he just, even though Joe is clearly not into this lifestyle, and is ready to just kind of do his own thing, he can't let this man go. Which has actually led to some interesting debate and conversation among some of the movie's fans of, is there a sort of gay subtext here that they couldn't
Hmm.
explore back then? Because every single time I watch this movie, it always strikes me over, he always sticks up for Joe, but he's also very forceful in wanting Joe to stay in his life. And, it-
Hmm.
and then, of course, when he is about to shoot him and he can't do it, he just can't pull the trigger, and you have that great close up shot where I think Edward G. Robinson's acting, which, by the way, I think Edward G. Robinson really elevates this movie. I think without his performance, this movie, even for me, would probably not be as high on me for me as I am on it, because I do think his performance is really incredible, and I can see why this ended up being his big breakout role. But you see that pain in his eyes that he just can't pull the trigger, even though he knows that he should, if he's going to get away with some of the stuff he wants to get away with. And also, Joe,
Yeah.
if you notice, Joe never rats him out. Even after he almost comes face to face with him in a gun, it's his girlfriend that steps up and tells the cops what's going on. But I do agree with you, even though it does show a little bit of that, it doesn't go as deep as, this is a short movie. It's only about like an hour and 20 minutes long. So it doesn't
Yeah.
go as deep as to an epic like the Godfather movies, a Irishman, uh, um, a Goodfellas. It doesn't go that deep
Killers of
into
the
it.
Flower Moon's another
Yeah,
one.
yeah, it doesn't go that deep into it, and it is kind of more of a cautionary tale, as a lot of these gangster movies were during the early 30s. Um, but I think but I do want to point out that I think Robinson's performance and breakout role is probably why it stands out the most to me, because I have seen Public Enemy, I've seen the original 1932 Scarface, I've seen Roaring Twenties, Angels with Dirty Faces, all those classic 30s gangster films, and this one just stands out the most to me because every single time I watch it, I'm just captivated by Robinson's performance, and I do think he single handedly does elevate the movie, which, aside from it, is objectively pretty safe in a lot of things compared to the gangster movies that we're used to today. So I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, and like I said, and but at the same time though, there are some things about it I do appreciate. Like you said, Edward G. Robinson is good in the film, and I like some of the actors in the film. And for this being a 1931 film, I did think the production value was pretty well done for what it is. Like, it has a grand enough scale to it, especially with the party scenes
Yeah.
where I'm like, you do feel a lot of grandiose to it. And for this being like such a small budget, I guess at the time it was kind of big. But it's still like, wow, they actually did this on like what, $200,000 at the time. That's like still pretty good. And the one thing I did appreciate about the film, though, it was nice to see, or at least be like, oh yeah, I forgot this was the kind of editing technique, was the way they edit that first robbery that you see at the beginning of the film, where they rob the party and rob all the money, and it was Caesar shoots the crime commissioner, and just the way that whole sequence was edited, almost like a montage sequence. And I'm like, yeah, it's like we really have evolved from this kind of editing style in a good way, though. And I always implore, even if they're not, even if they're film, if these kind of films aren't your kind of thing, for anyone out there listening, I implore audiences to take a look to see how far we've come from where we were in the 1930s. Like, even if they're not like even if you come out of it like, wow, I was so bored by it, or wow, that was like such a forgettable experience, or it was in one ear out the other. I do find there's a lot more merit you can get out of the old films than you would out of like another boring middle of the road modern film now, because it's like, at least back then, again, there's something there that I could appreciate and be like, again, editing style, or techniques that we wouldn't even explore until like later in our life or later down the road. And it's always interesting to see that kind of style and technique used, especially with even looking at another example of seeing how the history of cinema can change over the course of like 20 or even 100 years almost now. Look at the Bond films. You look at something like Doctor No, in terms of how that was structured, how it was paced, how it was told, all the way until No Time to Die. You see a difference in the editing style and how they're created alone. Even the Daniel Craig Bond films alone, into themselves, have their own unique changes of filmmaking, from how it's shot to how it's edited and such, even how it's scored. And it's great. I'm always grateful for that, even if I'm not the biggest fan of the world of said film. And that's something I did appreciate from Little Caesar, that I liked. And yeah, and I think really the only like major complaint I had with the film is that, like I said, I do wish that for this being an hour and 19 minutes, or 20 minutes, I should say, I do wish that it was a little bit more complex with the characters, or at least make me get more invested in the story, because I do feel like there's a story in here that's good. And funny enough, we actually do see it in other crime genre, crime films of sorts. We've seen that with Scorsese tackle this kind of rise and fall story so many times, even in organized crime of sorts with Wolf of Wall Street, where we see the rise and fall of Jordan Belfort, and we see how sadistic a simple man like him could get when he's given all this power and all this greed in the world. And we see you know what they do with it. They throw away their own personal life. They sort of treat everything like shit, as our character does here, with Caesar being like, yeah, who cares, who cares if I shot the crime commissioner? It was better that he got killed than me. And yeah, I appreciated that aspect of it. And yeah, so that's, yeah.
Well, and also how he just keeps getting cockier and cockier as he's climbing up the ladder. I mean, it gets to the point where the big boss, which I thought was interesting that they just refer to the big boss as the big boy. They never give the dude a name, but
Right.
when he finds out that he's basically become kind of like the second in command to this entire enterprise, he even makes a comment to one of his henchmen that, "Oh, I'm coming for the big boy eventually." And it's like that's how cocky he's been getting, to the point that that's how he at the
Yeah.
end, that's what leads to his demise. When he gets he the cop is talking bad about him in the newspapers, knowing that he's not going to be able to help himself. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but one thing that I will say real quick about these old classic movies is that I've always had a saying that they're almost kind of like liquor, where there can be an acquired taste. Where one
Yeah.
of these, you have to kind of experiment and see what does it for you. I can see some of these early 30 talking movies not being necessarily someone's cup of tea, but maybe something from the golden age, from particularly the 40s, mid 40s or so, when pacing starts to get a little bit better. I remember when I was decide I'm gonna really get into silent films and try to check those out. It took time for me to get used to it because A, the characters aren't talking, and B, the pacing is so slow. There are shots that last way too long, but after a while you get used to it because from the context of the time, they were still trying to learn and figure out how film was going to be presented to the masses. Um,
Yeah.
so that is something that one has to get used to whenever delving into these super early films. Um, but yeah, like I've already said, I can see where you're coming from in that they didn't dive that deep into some of these motivations and complexities. But I would argue that we got a little bit of a sneaking look at them every now and then.
Sure. Yeah, and the other thing I did also think was funny was I don't know if this is true, so I could be wrong. But I would I am curious to know if Michael Mann paid tribute to this movie in his own film Public Enemies at the end, spoiler alert for that film, where John Dillinger is shot outside of the movie
Well,
theater
that's a real
by all the
event, so it
cops.
shouldn't be a spoiler.
Yeah. Well, no, but yeah, but like in terms of like the way that he
Yeah.
presents that scene on in the film, I'm curious to know if that was the way he staged it and had like this tension building was crafted and inspired by this movie Little Caesar. I did actually remember liking Public Enemy, the Public Enemy at the time, the 1930s film, and I saw that in Stevenson in like 2019. So I do remember seeing it. I remember enjoying enough of it. And there's also, and like you said, like these older films are definitely acquired. They're like a acquired taste. Where it's like you're either on board with this or you're not. And sometimes you are. Like I was, in terms of like even just the French Wave era of filmmaking, I was shocked that I was that impressed by from Cleo 5 to 7, because in the first like 10-15 minutes, I'm like, oh boy, I am really not going to be on board with this film at all. And as the film progressed, I'm like, you know what? I really liked it enough to where I would recommend it if you're interested in this kind of movie, and it's like that sometimes. But still, I always recommend that, again, as we've stated before, I always recommend people to, broaden their horizons if possible. Try to search out something old, because or older on films, and just see if it works for you. Because you may never know. You might be surprised to how much you enjoyed said film, or or and if no, and like I said, if nothing else, I appreciated from this film that I was able to see how much we progressed and evolved from the pre-code Hollywood era of gangster films to where we are now, to where again we can make complex characters not just on film but even on TV, with The Sopranos being the really big one, or Boardwalk Empire. And it's interesting. And again, even just by the way that the film is edited and structured, it's all fascinating to me. It always is. And so yeah, so I think that is part of the charm too, as to why it still is within our history books, so to speak. And yeah, so and obviously the other element I do want to bring up is the Edward G. Robinson. Yeah, he delivers a pretty solid performance, he said, and he's definitely the one that makes the film work for what it's going for. Um, so yeah. Anything else you'd like to bring up for the movie itself?
Um, I would just bring up this kind of what I thought was kind of a cool trivia point in that so this is 1931. This is Edward G. Robinson's big breakout role. He would go on to do a lot of gangster roles and such. In 1931, we also got Frankenstein, and that was Boris
Oh,
Karloff's big breakout role. He would go on to do a lot of horror stuff. They actually starred together in a movie that got nominated for Best Picture. Not at the Academy Awards that this was nominated at, but the very following one. Um, a movie that came out at the same about the same year, but a little bit later because in the early years they didn't have the season didn't go through the entire calendar year. It went through half a year
Right.
into the other half of the year. And this movie
Yeah.
was nominated for Best Picture. It's called Five Star Final, and it's a very
Hmm.
different role for each guy. Where it's a newspaper drama about an editor who's kind of forced to do a story that he doesn't want to do that would expose skeletons in the closet of a well known society woman, and they both are in the movie. And I just thought it was interesting as my dog ain't co is in the background, but
Yeah.
um, I just thought it was interesting that they had their breakout roles and but they ended up starring together in a movie that nobody remembers, but he got nominated for Best Picture.
Hmm. Interesting.
Oh, and
Yeah.
also I should point out, I believe
Yeah.
Five
Go ahead.
Star Final was actually directed by this same director of Little Caesar.
Mervyn
Yes,
Leroy.
I believe that he directed Five Star Final as well.
Yeah, I'm looking through 19. Let me see if I can find it. 1932.
31, 31.
Oh, 31. Okay, 31. Little Caesar, Gentleman's Fate, Too Young to Marry. Yep, you're right. 5 star final. Yep. Uh, only nominated for Best
Yeah,
Picture.
it was one of those,
Wow.
which happened every now and then in the early Oscar years. Now that's
Yeah.
like near basically impossible to happen.
Yeah, you're either, yeah, if you're gonna be like a lone or a nearly alone production design production, excuse me, nearly a lone Best Picture nominee, you're gonna get some kind of other nomination, whether it's to be the acting categories,
It's usually
song,
screenplay.
writing. Yeah, screenplay. Yeah, like Serious Man, Women Talking, Past Lives. So yeah, but yeah, so that's pretty much all I wanted to all I have to say in regards to Little Caesar. I respected it more than I admired it or loved it, I should say, or enjoyed it. But like I said, if someone were to tell me this is one of their favorite gangster films of all time or even of that time, I'm like, that's fine. I'm okay with it. It's I'm not gonna get mad at you for liking this, but if like something, I don't know, something as schlocky as like or think something like the Jurassic World sequels are like a masterpiece, and it's like, yeah, I need you to let's put him in an insane asylum. Let's put him in a straitjacket because this guy's
If
cuckoo.
anything, I think you've
Um,
mentioned this, but if anything, for any listener, I would say if anything, this is an interesting thing to go back and sort of look at the origins of the gangster genre. So
yes, yeah. So, I would. Yeah, it's like like enough of a recommendation. If this sounds like your kind of thing, then sure, go ahead and check it out. If if not, then that's fine too. So, anyways, so yeah, like I said, I'm pretty much done with my final thoughts on the film itself. And I just want to ask if this was worthy of, in your opinion, if this was worthy of its sole writing nomination it got.
I thought about this. It's tough to say because in the early years, especially as you go through and look at the what got nominated and such, you can tell the Academy was still trying to figure some things out. You could tell they were still trying to figure out, okay, what do we nominate? What do we award? What narratives are we going to like gravitate to? Um, how often are we going to like award certain people multiple times and such? If you go back and look at the first couple years of the Oscars, it's super messy. There's a
Yeah.
lot of weird stuff that doesn't make sense. Like My Man Godfrey is the only movie that has gotten nominated for all four acting awards, director, screenplay, and somehow it didn't make a Best Picture field of 10. Um, you
Yeah.
see weird stuff like that. Um, I don't know if this should have been necessarily in for writing. I think there was it probably snuck in here because there was a lot of respect for the adaptation. even though the
Sure.
author himself was not a big fan of the casting compared to the book. Now, I have not read the book that this is based on, so I don't know what comparisons I can make there. So I think that's
Mhm.
probably what led to it sneaking in there. Is that I got to believe there was just a lot of respect for the adaptation that was accomplished here. In terms of whether I think it deserved it, um, I don't know because I would have to really delve deep into the book and see how well it was adapted.
Yeah, yeah, and I haven't seen. Yeah, again, I really can't speak on like was this like a great like adapted screenplay in of itself. I think this was also the same year that
Yeah,
Cimarron, I think it
it
was,
was. It,
won Best Picture,
yes.
infamously won Best Picture, and a couple other milestones was the actor Jackie Cooper was nominated. He was 9 years old. He was the first child actor to receive a nomination and was the youngest nominee until Tatum O'Neal received a nomination for a performance in 1973's Paper Moon. And Jackie remained the second youngest Oscar nominee of all time and the only Best Actor nominee under 18.
I think there's a.
Apparently,
I was gonna say there's a story that he kept falling asleep during the ceremony.
yeah. And I'm looking through here. Lionel Barrymore became the first person to have received multiple to receive nominations in multiple categories, having been nominated for Best Director for Madam X at the Second Academy Awards, as well as the only Best Actor winner born in the 1870s. So that's pretty interesting. And Norman Tarug was he won Best Director that year and was the youngest person to win the award Best Director for 8.5 decades until Damien Chazelle won for La La Land, and he was only 32 at the time.
Yep.
Norman was, so it's an interesting. Yeah, it's some interesting milestones we had, and Cimarron. Cimarron was also like the first and only Western to win Best Picture at the time until Dance with Wolves in
Right.
1990. And yeah, and then it also says here is the first film to win more than two
Yes.
awards, which is strange. Yeah, where we just saw like this past year, Oppenheimer got like what 13
Yes.
nominations
One
and
set.
won seven
Yeah,
Oscars.
we've had back to
So
back years now of the Best Picture winner winning 7 Oscars. Only time will tell if we've entered a new era of sweepers. Because for a while there, we saw two just winning on with two or with well, more with 3 or 4 Oscars.
don't forget, Coda won all three of its Oscars,
Yeah,
which is technically a
yeah,
sweeper.
that is true. So I
Yeah.
did want to make a point, if I could, about this ceremony. I I will say I've seen all the Best Picture nominees of this ceremony. This is probably the second worst Best Picture lineup of all time. Only
Ooh.
only second to the 2 years before when Broadway Melody won. Um, the only one of these movies I would say I like is The Front Page, and I just think that's okay. Even though it is an
Mm.
interesting movie to watch, if anybody's a big fan of His Girl Friday, this is that's kind of a loose remake of this. Um, but
Hmm.
I think it's interesting that you look back on this. If you look at a lot of these nominees, they didn't necessarily age to become timeless classics. Out of the timeless classics from the early 30s tend to be genre films like Dracula, Frankenstein, King Kong, some of the early gangster films. So the
Yeah.
Academy kind of missed the boat, but if you understand what they tend to go for, I can see why they did. Um, so when people complain that the Academy missed the boat on this movie that's obviously going to become a classic down the line and such, this has been going all the way back to the beginning. This has always been an issue with them.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And it's forever going to be an issue with them, especially when they still have a bias towards horror
Yeah,
films. Unless if it's doing something that's breaking the mold or being a genre, being more of like a psychological thriller like Get Out was. It's like they're never going to respect horror in the right ways. Even looking at Poor Things, it's like that is such a weird out there movie that we got this last year, and it managed to get into the best picture lineup, and it got those awards because of the pedigree it had with the crew involved, with Tony McNamara adapting that book and Yorgos Lanthimos directing and producing it with Emma Stone. um that is such a film that where it's like I don't know if anyone would have been able to do this kind of thing, and it became a box office hit, like on a budget of like what, $30 million. That movie made 117 million or around there, and it was a big hit. And it was, it's just something that I think like 10, 20 years ago, something like Poor Things just would not have been picked as a best picture nominee or even been as respected in terms of wins as it ended up getting. But yeah. Um, but you're right. Yeah, they're always missing the boat every so often. They're like, "Oh yeah, we'll get around to that person," and when we do, it's like for the wrong movie, which I have a feeling that they might do that this year. We'll see. Because there's someone I'm looking to, and I'm like, I have a feeling like that could happen, but we'll see. Yeah, but as far as my thoughts, yeah, I guess uh, again, like I guess I'm fine with it getting the adapted screenplay nod because just because they yeah, like everything you pretty much said about it, where it's like they respected the way that this was adapted, even if the author of the book hated the casting involved. But yeah, and I'm looking here, we only had of that year, we only had picture, director, the two lead categories, and then original story, adapted screenplay, best sound, art direction, and cinematography. So no costumes, no makeup, no editing, no score. Not even any of the short film categories or documentary categories we had, or animated films
Yeah.
in that matter. So yeah, I think this might be the farthest back I've ever gone for this show. Is 1931. So yeah, thank you, Lewis, for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, I will
So
say, did you want me to make my case for what else I would have nominated it for?
yeah, sure, yeah, go ahead,
So
yeah, go right
obviously,
ahead.
I'm a big fan of the movie. I think absolutely, especially if you with how it's aged and how important it went on to be for him. I think Edward G. Robinson absolutely should have gotten a shot at a nomination for Best Actor. Um,
Mhm.
and obviously, I would nominate it for Best Picture, especially considering what got nominated for Best Picture in comparison.
Yeah,
I do think Cimarron is. I'm close to having watched all the Best Picture winners. I think Cimarron is easily the worst that I've seen of all the Best Picture winners. Um,
worse than Crash.
I haven't seen Crash in forever, so it's gonna be interesting to see because I do got to revisit that. Um,
Oh boy.
I haven't watched Crash since I think, oh, good lord, I think since the year it came out. Um,
Oh
so,
boy.
but yeah, I would nominate it for picture, actor, and maybe cinematography, um,
Hmm.
and maybe art direction because it has some pretty interesting sets in there.
Yeah, again, as I said before, like the scale of it is quite impressive for this kind of
Yeah,
movie. Even if most of it probably was done on the back lot, it's still pretty interesting how they were able to set it up as like a big scale production and use what limited resources they have to make it look so big.
yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, no, yeah, it does a good job there. Yeah, and I keep forgetting. Yeah, Edward G. Robinson famously never got an
Nope.
Academy Award nomination. I don't think he even got like an honorary Oscar of any kind, if I'm not
And
mistaken. Let me
it's not
see.
like he wasn't on their radar. Like he was in various Best Picture nominated films. It wasn't like he was in Ten Commandments. He was in Double Indemnity. He was in. I'd have to double check, but he's been he was they were watching his movies, so
Yeah, I had 10. Okay, I did not know that. Okay. Yeah, Ten Commandments is another film that I have not seen, but a lot of that nowadays is because of how little time I have on my
Yes,
hands. Where
I love Ten
it's
Commandments, but you're gonna have to sit down for that one. That movie is I think it's like
yeah,
4 hours
I had to
long.
spend the whole day to watch
Yeah.
it. Yeah. I found out Edward G. Robinson did get an honorary
Oh, okay,
Oscar.
okay.
He got it the same year that Godfather won Best Picture.
Ah, oh, so I think yeah. So
Yeah.
during his twilight years.
Yeah, which is so funny because yeah, that was like the Godfather was like the one of the first movies to have like a mostly Italian crew and cast behind that film. Like I said, Talia Shire and Francis Coppola is writing and directing it with Mario Puzo, co-writing the script and adapting that novel. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't think that was a coincidence.
Yeah, I think that was a case of like, oh boy, we got to get around to this soon. Otherwise, we're gonna be kicking ourselves. So let's give him an honorary Oscar. Um, yeah, yeah, and the Academy is famously snubbed a lot of great actors from even just you know we've seen actors who finally got their nods and yet they still haven't won. Like they never gave Peter O'Toole his Oscar, and even though granted again there was other reasons why this man lost, but Chadwick Boseman only got one Oscar nomination. And I'm just glad he at least got nominated for something because with a short-lived career like that, it's like, man, that guy could have been something more than what he was already, and he was already at such a great moment in his career. But yeah. So, anyways, trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to say. Yeah. So, like I said, yeah. Don't really have too much to add about this film. You know, sure, production design was pretty good. For like a nomination, I'd say maybe, and um, yeah, I'd have to go through the rest of these films to be like what was like actually deserving of the production design and cinematography category. But I am very curious to see how I feel about Cimarron as a whole or Skippy.
Well, yeah.
So
Like I said, personally, it's one of the worst Best Picture lineups I've ever had to sit through.
yeah, I'm looking
Although I will say good
through
luck with Eastland because the final part of that movie is almost impossible to find. I still haven't found it. Yeah,
Eastland. Okay.
there's no physical copy of that
Huh.
movie. Um, it's
Only one print of the film is known to exist through bootleg DVD copies. Exit minus the final scene. This. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
And then there's another
Uh,
Best Picture nominated film, The Patriot. I want to say that that's a lost film. And then there's another one called White Parade from a couple years later, which is you can go to UCLA and watch it, but there's no other way to watch it. And I do not have the time or money to go to UCLA to watch it.
I was gonna say, it will not. Eastlands will not fall into public domain until 2027.
Mm, yeah,
So you got to wait about 3 more years, and then it'll finally be in the public's
yeah.
hands.
Yeah, people, and that's a
So,
whole other subject. That there's movies out there that are lost to the public, or they're sitting in some university screening room, but you have to
mm,
go and physically see it. It's not available anywhere else.
yeah, give us money to watch it now, or wait 5 years or 10 years, however long it
Yeah,
takes. All right. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for our show. Don't really have too much else to add. Otherwise, we'd be talking forever about just a bunch of nothing or stuff we've already said, we've already made our piece about. And so, yeah. So, like I said, Lewis, I just want to say thank you for dedicating your time to being here on the show. Before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to plug in or where you could listen to or where our listeners can follow you along after the show is
yeah.
done?
Just go to mendesmoviereport.com. It takes you straight to my Substack. There's a completely free tier, so the folks don't have to pay to subscribe necessarily. I do weekly movie reviews. I do Oscar projections. I try to list some of my favorite classic films, And on social media, whatever social media folks have, Facebook, Threads, X, Letterbox, I'm under Mendez Movie RPT.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure to link that below in the description. As for me, you can follow myself and the show through Linktree under at Matthew995, where you can follow along on all my social media accounts, such as Twitter and Letterbox. On the same site, I've also provided a link for where you can listen to more episodes of the show. And if you're interested in being in the hot seat down the road, let me know, and hopefully we can arrange that happening soon. Before I do my, trademark sign off, I just want to let everyone know that we're recording this a bit earlier than expected. It's now like almost middle of June, only because everything's getting caught up right now. I do want to let everyone know that I am prepping for a 1 year anniversary. In case anyone hasn't seen my Twitter posts, or if you haven't, I'll just remind you guys we are doing a 1 year anniversary for the show. The episode will be out a little bit earlier than usual, just because of how the dates are and how I'm only working on a bi-weekly schedule. But in case again, let me remind you, in case you weren't aware or you forgot, our 1 year anniversary episode will be on Glass Onion, and I purposely did that because my pilot episode was on Knives Out. And yes, I will be getting back Miles Hughes from Awards Radar to cover said episode. At least I'm going to try to. Our schedule is a bit hectic right now, but my goal is to try to get him back on to do the 1 year anniversary episode for the show. And I figured, what better way to celebrate almost 1 year of the show existing by covering Glass Onion. And yeah, so that'll be fun. Like I said, Lewis, thank you again for your time to be here on the show. And yeah, we can't wait to bring you guys, and to you, Lewis, as well. We can't wait to bring everyone that 1 year anniversary uh, episode. We'll think of something to do for the special occasion. But we'll keep you posted as everything comes through. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and we hope to see you at the movies. Take care, guys.